Hello, everybody. Welcome to Racing Insights. My name is Aryan, and today you are here to watch the British Grand Prix race preview by yours truly. I want to discuss this in depth, and I've been kind of waiting for it, to be honest, because generally speaking, I wanted to see what the drivers had to say first and foremost going into the weekend. Of course, last week we had some comments from Max Verstappen, but I wanted to see what the other drivers had to say, because if every other driver had the same thing to say as Max, that was pretty much guaranteed to be the case that we would see for the rest of this weekend. And what I have in store for you is not necessarily great news. Now, of course, I'm still very excited for the Grand Prix because it is Silverstone. It was my first ever Grand Prix that I'd ever physically gone to. And generally speaking, Silverstone has always been a banger, exciting action, some insane storylines usually coming out of it. And it's generally got something about it that makes it super, super exciting. So for me personally, I'm very excited for the weekend nonetheless, and I'm still hoping to see a good race, but I cannot lie, the drivers have me a little bit worried. Now, in this race preview, as always, we're going to go over the track characteristics, we're going to go over every single team, and at the end of it all, I'm going to give you guys my predictions on who's going to reign supreme come the end of the weekend. Now, of course, in the comment section down below, I want you guys to let me know who do you guys think will finish first, second, and third, and of course, do you guys think there's going to be any sort of drama coming out of it between teammates, between other drivers? You guys can let me know in the comment section down below. Now, first and foremost, let's go over to the track map, because that is where we're going to kick things off with first and foremost. And I'm going to move my head over to the left-hand side here so that you guys can actually see where I am going to be pointing towards all around over here. And we're going to talk about the track first and foremost. So, Silverstone this weekend in terms of temperatures is actually better than expected. There's been a couple of showers over the last few days in London and generally in the United Kingdom. But of course, I don't think there is any weather forecast outside of some cloudy situations. Actually, I'm just looking at it at 10 a.m. on Saturday. There is a chance of rain, but that'll probably impact some of the earlier sessions, probably Formula 3, Formula 2, but nothing else. And on Sunday, it's clear skies with obviously some cloud cover pretty much. So in terms of temperatures, don't expect it to be like it has been over the last few weeks in Europe, where it's been 30, 35, approaching 40 in some cases. It's going to be a modest, I think, 27, 28. So I think most teams should be able to live with the thermal temperatures. The thermal side of the components, the tire deg, everything of that sort, that should be a little bit more manageable than we've seen in, for example, Austria and in Barcelona. But the bigger problem I think the teams will be facing this weekend is actually from the track itself and the nature of the track. When you look at Silverstone, you generally see a track that requires you to be a master at various things, right? You look at, for example, Sector 1, I think, is the perfect example of this, right? Where you have a nice high-speed corner here into turn 1 and 2, and then in 3, 4, and 5, it's slow-speed corners, generally requires you to have good traction out of it, and then you have this massive straight down Wellington. So, in all honesty, generally speaking, the rest of the track is more or less the same. Sector 2, you also have something similar-ish. 6, 7, slow speed for the most part. Then 9, you have a high-speed corner. 10, 11, high-speed, medium speed, and 12 and 13 in Maggots and Beckett's. So generally speaking, it's more or less the same. Sector 3, same thing. You go down the Hanger Straight. Then you go into, Club, Vale, all of that jazz. It's slow speed, high speed, a little bit of high speed, medium speed more so. You need to be good at everything. Now, obviously, that is going to be super important for most of the teams. But more importantly, one thing to note is that in terms of slow speed, heavy braking zones, and generally a lot of cornering, there's not much of that, right? You look at turn 16 and turn 3 mainly, if you want to talk about heavy braking zones for the most part, right? Because 3 into 4 isn't really a heavy braking zone because you're not going into it with high speed. Same with turn 5 as well. And in turn 6, you lift off a little bit, but it's more medium speed than it is slow speed, I would say personally. And that's going to cause issues for most of the teams because battery management, and this is what all the drivers have been talking about today, have been saying, is that battery management around here is going to be pretty nasty. In fact, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the FIA have come out and said that the teams will be at full throttle for 82% of the lap. 82% of the lap. What that means is basically you're not going to be on full throttle around this corner or these sections, but the rest of the corners, you're going to be full throttle. And the reason for that is because most teams will be super clipping to ensure that they can get the energy back for their battery. This is going to be pretty nasty to watch, in my opinion. I think it's going to be a rough watch as viewers, especially in qualifying. And this is the problem with these regulations, right? I don't mind innovation, and I don't mind especially this whole idea of 50-50 when you put it on paper. But when you put it in practice and you realize how difficult it is to manage a battery using only what is effectively braking performance, right, for the most part, and LiCo, it's not actually a good idea whatsoever. Even with the lowered megajoules percentage or whatever they're going and cooking up every single weekend, it's still a problem. And this is going to be a major problem, especially for certain teams that are struggling on that front. Ferrari, potentially Audi, Aston Martin. I mean, like, come on. It's gonna be a bit of a nightmare for, I think, a lot of teams. I think there will be some teams who will be able to cope very well with this, and we'll come on to them in just a moment. But I do think that this is a it's going to be a pretty rough watch, I think, for most viewers, just generally because of how this track is in terms of its nature, with the lack of opportunities to harvest the energy. It's going to be nasty. It's definitely going to be nasty. In terms of straight line modes, you've got four, one down Hamilton Straight, one down Wellington, one going out of Woodcut and Luffield into Copse, and then you have obviously one down the Hanger Straight. So pretty simple, pretty straightforward. I know some people were deliberating maybe some more straight lines. I think some people were expecting one here, maybe one going into Maggots and Beckett's, but I think that the one into Maggots and Beckett's was unlikely to happen, just because, you know, closing the rear wing and potentially having high speed incidents, it was going to be a bit of a scare anyways. And I mean, we've seen it happen where, unfortunately, issues, let me just bring this back over here. Unfortunately, issues where the wing may not close properly, a la Max Verstappen in Austria, according to obviously Red Bull. That's going to cause problems. So it makes sense as to why we do not have a straight line mode down Maggots and Beckett's, or going into Maggots and Beckett's, I should say. But there we go. That's the track for you guys. I'm a bit worried. I will still say that. I think that's the biggest concern I have, is just the battery management that these guys are going to have to do. It's going to be a bit of a scare. But we'll have to just wait and see. We'll have to just wait and see how it looks on Friday, because that'll be the first big example of how it's going to be. And speaking of which, it's a sprint weekend as well. I completely forgot. It's a sprint weekend. I haven't done my predictions for the sprint weekend, but we'll do that as well later on. I don't think it's going to change anything, to be honest, but we'll see. But yeah, sprint weekend as well. Teams will have less time to practice. It's going to be a fun ride. It's going to be a fun ride. I think there's going to be some teams that are going to be absolutely hooked. But they'll at least have the sprint race to do a bit of practice, basically. Anyways, let's take a look at Mercedes first and foremost, shall we? Let me move my head back into the middle so that I'm not disturbing Antonelli or George Russell. So, let's talk about Mercedes. I think these guys are going to just take it away from here, man. They've managed to potentially resolve their reliability issues based on them handling the hot temperatures in Austria. Antonelli was behind, a lot of cars regularly, and he was able to come out just fine. And more or less, the rest of the Mercedes customer teams look to be fine as well, outside of Carlos Sainz. So, to be honest, I don't see anybody else taking this victory from them, to be quite honest. Any hopes I had last week immediately dashed. Honestly, it's just gone like that. I think it's going to be an easy Mercedes 1-2 for both sprint and main race, to be quite honest. I don't think anybody's going to come in their way. The question is really, more so than anything else, who of the two is going to be on top? And I think generally, if you look at how it's been for the majority of the races, right? Austria aside, which I think even in Austria, I have reason to believe Antonelli was faster in, the latter half of the race. Antonelli has generally been the faster driver over George Russell. Be it Japan, you look at Monaco, you look at the likes of Canada, Spain, Kimi has been rapid. He has been very rapid. Obviously, Spain, he had those reliability gremlins, which unfortunately hampered him. But, in Austria, if that first stint had gone any better, if he hadn't gone wide like 4 times, I think he could have easily overtaken George 100%. I genuinely do believe that. There would have been obviously the challenge of Max Verstappen, but I think he would have dispatched Max. I mean, the rate he was capturing Max at the end of the race, it was a joke. I mean, like literally, you cut away the 3 or 4 seconds he probably lost going wide in the first 2 laps or so, whatever. He probably would have been ahead of those 2 by the end of the race. Now, there is obviously people saying that George was just managing his pace and everything, but we've just got the fact that Antonelli was faster race pace wise. So it's going to be interesting to see how we fare going into Britain. Generally, Russell has done well here. He's had bad luck here. I remember in 2024, he retired. I remember I was watching it and I saw him going into the pits and I was wondering why he was going into the pits and then found out he was retiring. He's not had the best of luck here. And so far this season, British drivers have not had, or not British drivers, home race drivers have generally not had a good performance. Charles crashed in Monaco. Oscar crashed in Australia. You had, Alonso and Sainz having their own debacles in Spain. It's not been a great race season for people who want to do well in their home races. So let's see how it goes for the British drivers. There's probably going to be 1 or 2 of them that might struggle. You never know. But I think Antonelli is going to take the top step over Russell. There's more proof in the pudding that Antonelli has just been on top of Russell throughout the season so far. Obviously, Russell does have the more momentum, I would say, the better momentum going into this race weekend. But I do think Antonelli's just got the overall performance over him. In terms of the car, like I said, I don't think there's anything for Mercedes to worry about. The less I say about them, the better. They've got the best engine. The battery is going to just perform for them. They have insane levels of battery management. Their deployment works extremely well. They're going to probably be the best team in terms of the Mercedes engine teams, I should say, are probably going to be running amok all these other cars. Obviously, it just depends on if the other teams know what they're doing, of course. That is to say, when it comes to the customers and knowing how to deploy and the right battery plan and everything, it's on those teams, but I think they'll be able to manage compared to all these other teams. Let's move on to the next team, who is second in the constructors, but I don't think they're going to do well at all this weekend. It's Ferrari, of course, our boys in red, coming off a absolutely disastrous weekend in Austria with potential issues with tire deg, too much energy deployment out of traction zones, just no pace at the end of the straights. You name it. This team is struggling. Coming from an absolute W in Spain to whatever the hell last week was in Austria, I think it's going to be more or less the same in Silverstone. Now, of course, they do have some advantage in Silverstone where there are more corners where they can potentially take advantage of their chassis, but the straights are just way too long. Hanger and Wellington are both insanely long straights. And generally, you also have a lot of mini straights, as I like to call them. Then on top of all of that as well, your battery management is a problem. So that is also going to be a factor for Ferrari where I think they're going to struggle massively. Now, I will say they also have an advantage that they are on lower altitude this time around, so the smaller turbo should be working a bit better around Silverstone. But do I think it's going to go well for them still? No, I don't think so. I think it's going to still be a pretty rough weekend for the pair of them. But I do believe Hamilton will still be taking a good chunk of pace advantage over Charles this weekend. One, it's Silverstone, Hamilton's proving grounds. This guy's a demon around these ends. You have to remember, up until 2021, this guy won every single race except 2018. And 2018 was thanks to Kimi Räikkönen. Sebastian Vettel only won that race thanks to Kimi Räikkönen. So frankly speaking, I don't see Charles having a great chance against Lewis this weekend. I do hope that he will have a better race this weekend. I think, well, it being a sprint weekend is not great for Charles. I will say that. I've noticed that Charles just is nowhere in terms of, getting to grips with the car in a sprint weekend, usually, to be honest. He struggles quite often. And that's going to be a big factor going into this weekend. There's only been a couple of times where he's actually done well, but it's only been like a few times. A sprint weekend is like, it's more so the sprint race is a practice session for him. So I do think Hamilton is going to just be on top of Charles, but to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if they're fighting over 7th and 8th. Honestly, I think they're going to be the 4th best team going into this weekend, and it's going to cause a lot of chaos on Twitter. I know it for a fact. I already have my For You page. My For You page is 3 things, okay? It's Genshin Impact, the game, that is, if you guys weren't aware. It's usually Persona, role-playing, or other RPGs like Final Fantasy, or it's Charles Leclerc fans complaining about Ferrari being ass, usually. And maybe some IndyCar and IMSA, usually. So I wouldn't be surprised if come the end of the race weekend, I'm going to have to just watch that go down in my For You page on Twitter again. But that aside, this is something we should expect. I'm not expecting anything from Ferrari until we get to Zandvoort or something. That's when I'm praying that these magical engine updates actually do something. We'll have to see if it actually does something. But until then, Hungary is our only opportunity of actually getting a good result, I think. Belgium and Silverstone are both going to be bad. The question is, how bad? We'll have to wait and see for that. Now we move on to McLaren, and I think they're going to do well this weekend. I mean, we already saw last weekend, Oscar was doing really well. I think, generally speaking, they are still getting to grips with their car more than anything else. I think, obviously, they have the Mercedes engine, so there's not much of a problem on that front. But I think what they're struggling with is more on a chassis and aerodynamics front. And I do think while they might potentially fall back behind Red Bull, I do believe they have an opportunity going into this weekend purely because of that Mercedes engine. If they can get those deployment strategies right and, are able to take advantage of that Mercedes battery, I think they can do extremely well. And I do believe McLaren will do well. You have to remember, well, one, they're going into this race weekend with a nice livery, I will say. I wouldn't say it's in like an amazing looker, but I think for what is supposed to be a retro livery, I think they've actually done a good job here compared to their other retro liveries they've tried doing recently, in my personal opinion. So generally speaking, I think they're going to do well this weekend because of that battery performance advantage I feel they'll have. And I also think they'll also have the Lando factor. Obviously, last week out in Austria, Lando was pretty much nowhere compared to Piastri. He was struggling a little bit for sure, and he just didn't have the pace, generally speaking. He was also put on a bit of a rougher strategy, I would say, compared to Piastri. So I think this weekend, home Grand Prix, obviously won last year, generally goes well around Silverstone as well. I think he's gonna do well this weekend, and I think he will be ahead of Piastri by a good amount. I genuinely do believe that. I think it's gonna be the inverse of what happened last week. I genuinely believe that. So we'll have to wait and see, but I do think McLaren are going to be the second best team here as well. I really do believe that. Let's move on to Red Bull now. Red Bull. Amazing performance last weekend. Most people would probably tout them to probably actually be the second best team this weekend, but I still don't have a complete idea on how their upgrades are going to look on a track that requires a little bit more finesse compared to Austria, right? Compared to the Red Bull Ring. And generally speaking as well, we also don't really know how their battery side of things is compared to Mercedes. That I think is going to be the other big factor we'll have to wait and see on, because obviously we know their ICE is the best, apparently, according to the FIA's ADO results, right? But the battery, I think, is going to be the bigger play here this weekend. And as a result, do I think Red Bull are going to do well? Only time will tell. It was a toss up for me to decide between McLaren or Red Bull on who's going to be second and third in terms of performance. I think Red Bull might be third, but Max might be able to pull off a stunner of a result and potentially pull ahead of the McLarens, potentially. That we'll have to just wait and see on that, of course, right? But you can't discount the Max factor. For the drivers, I think it's pretty straightforward. I have to give it to Max, to be honest. I think Max is going to have a much better chance at potentially a podium than Isaac. Isaac's still performing well. I have to say this, by the way. Credit where it's due, Isaac has still been performing well. The only thing I will probably say is that, yes, he still does a couple of mistakes here and there, but Austria, good performance. Not an amazing performance, but a good performance. Got into P6, it was. Solid race overall. Just needs to push forward, maybe try and get closer and closer to Max if he can. Obviously, he's not going to get on the same level as Max. I don't think even Red Bull are expecting that. But as long as he's able to maintain that pace and keep close to Max, I think that's going to be a good job for him and the Red Bull team as a whole. So let's see how that pans out, of course. I don't want to really stick around with Red Bull too much because I think it's a very up in the air topic for them in terms of just how they'll perform when it comes to their car. But I do think it's going to be close between them and McLaren. Alpine. I think for Alpine, I'm hoping there's some upgrades. I don't think I've seen anything in regards to upgrades today. Let me actually check. Has a upgrade list come out? I don't think it'll come out till tomorrow. So unfortunately, let's see. I'm not sure I've seen any upgrades for Alpine this weekend. It doesn't seem like we've had much information on Austria this weekend. Yeah, it'll probably come out tomorrow, unfortunately, the upgrades for all the teams. But I think if Alpine can bring an upgrade or two, they can probably take the challenge back into their hands against Racing Bulls, because so far, obviously, in the last 3 weekends, they've been bleeding a couple of points to Alpine, right? Or not to Alpine, to Racing Bulls. Racing Bulls have been consistently getting double points finishes, obviously, usually in the lower tail of the points finishes, but still, both drivers have been doing that. But on Alpine's side, it's been a bit of a struggle, especially from Franco Colapinto, who's been struggling recently, had a very poor race in Austria as well. Potentially might be on the chopping block. Of course, Briatore being there, you're always on the chopping block if you're not performing. And so to me personally, I think this weekend, Franco has to do a better race overall. I think this time around in Silverstone, they've got to give us a good performance. And being a Mercedes customer engine, I think this is their best opportunity to take advantage of that opportunity and actually score some good points. I think they have to take advantage, maybe even challenge Ferrari. To be honest, I genuinely am worried about Ferrari. I have very little faith in what I'm expecting to see this weekend from Ferrari. So I honestly do believe that there is a small chance if Alpine can maybe get enough couple of upgrades. Again, being a British-based team, easier to get upgrades into the racetrack, and also generally a good racetrack for Mercedes customer engines. I think it's an opportunity. Now, the only reason why I also do not expect to see many upgrades this weekend, it's a sprint weekend, of course, right? But I do think if you're a team that's based in, Britain, if you're not a Ferrari or Racing Bulls or a Audi, it's a better opportunity to bring in a set of upgrades, to be quite honest. I think it's a better opportunity to bring in a set of upgrades now than, potentially another sprint weekend or somewhere far, far away, potentially. And I think Alpine bringing upgrades would be nice. Gives them a bit more of a chance to take on Racing Bulls. And speaking of Racing Bulls, oh yeah, by the way, I forgot to mention, I think Gasly is going to still come out on top over Franco, but I do hope that Franco actually performs well. It doesn't matter if they come 8th and ninth, as long as and if Gasly is ahead of Franco, as long as they're scoring points. I think that's what Briatore will want the most, is that at least Franco needs to be closer, if not in the points, to be able to potentially retain his seat. Racing Bulls. Man. Racing Bulls, I think they're pulling out all the stops, man. I wasn't expecting yet another double points finish last weekend. Now, I did miss out on it in my race review and my driver ratings, because I actually didn't. I must have been busy talking to my family while the race was going on during that period, or something had come up. I don't know, but I missed that whole debacle between these two. Apparently, Arvid was given team orders to stay behind and or swap positions with Liam, and he didn't do it. He tried challenging for it, and obviously that caused a little bit of inter-team chaos or drama. I don't think it's that major when it's over 9th and 10th necessarily. Of course, for them, it is more so the case because it's points paying and you want to make sure you're maximizing points for the entire team. But I don't think it was that crazy, considering the rest of the drivers behind weren't that much in competition necessarily, as far as I could tell. So I think it's going to blow over. I think they would have discussed it. It happens, obviously with these teams. There's always there's always going to be some form of fire, especially when there's a rookie driver in the car. You're going to have that happen. It's happened all this time. It's nothing new necessarily, I would say. So for me personally, I think it's a no problem situation necessarily. It's a no long-term problem situation at the very least. But of course, I do think that we have to talk about Liam Lawson, because there's been a lot of talk recently over the last week and a half, or week basically, more so since Sunday actually. Since the race on Sunday, I've been just hearing about it more and more, is that Nicolas Solov, of course, Red Bull Junior driver, currently in the fight for the championship in Formula 2, is potentially contesting for a Racing Bull seat, and it's potentially going to be Liam Lawson's seat. Now, I do believe that this is a bit harsh, considering Liam Lawson has performed well this season, has been performing quite well, and in the recent couple of races, might I say, exceptionally well. So to me, I think it's a bit of a stretch to necessarily replace him when he's still performing really well. I think the next couple of races is probably going to determine Red Bull / Racing Bulls' decision over Liam Lawson. But if he continues to keep scoring points, continues to get some good qualifying results over in Silverstone, in Belgium, and in Hungary, I don't see a need to replace him. So for me, I think Liam is still going to obviously still come ahead of Arvid. Arvid has still got those niggling issues. He's still got to resolve some of those, minor mistakes here and there, and just generally lack of pace in the race. Maybe tire wear management is something that he needs to work on. But I think he's still doing exceptionally well. But as long as Lawson is performing well, I don't see a reason to replace him, to be honest. I genuinely don't think so. But I also do understand Red Bull's position, because, well, it is a case in which where a driver is doing exceptionally well in the junior categories, you want to have him in your seat, right? It's a bit of a difficult one for Red Bull. And it's one of the issues of having so many drivers in the academy. Is it a good issue to have or a bad issue to have? That's up for debate. I think it's a good issue to have. Obviously, as a team and as a team owner, I would say that having an influx of drivers is always amazing, because you're going to obviously have some great talent, potentially, that's in the rough in the junior categories, but shines like a diamond in the, senior categories. But at the same time, you also understand, as a human being, as somebody who's, looking at somebody, almost achieve their dream, but fail, or, not get the opportunity to even push forward and have to be, pushed aside for a younger driver. you always feel for that as well, especially if you are performing well like Liam is. It always is going to happen, but we'll have to just wait and see on that front. Now we move on to Haas. And Haas, last week was just as bad as the previous couple of weeks. I said last week, oh, I hope they do actually a little bit better. They didn't. And do I think they're going to do well this weekend? No, because they have a Ferrari engine in the back and their car is shit. So it's going to be a rough ride for both Esteban and Behrman this weekend. Obviously, with Esteban, again, there's been a lot of suggestions about potentially his seat at the team. He came out and said, the team has complete faith in him and he has complete faith in the team. But things can change rapidly. This is Formula One. Anything can happen. So I don't think necessarily it's Esteban should take it lightly, and I'm pretty sure he's not taking it lightly. I do think he's going to have to push forward. He's going to have to just keep doing better and better. The main thing he needs to do is just finish ahead of Behrman. While the team is struggling with upgrades and everything, and a couple of race weekends where the Ferrari engine isn't up to scratch, he's just got to perform better than Behrman. And I think finishing ahead of him is the most important thing. In the case of Oliver Behrman, he's going to be a bit disappointed going into this weekend with all the suggestions that Lewis is going to be signing on for Ferrari for 2027 and potentially maybe longer. I mean, I knew that Hamilton was going to stay for 2027. The real surprise is actually beyond 2027, maybe even 2028, 2029. I don't know what both drivers, fuck me, man. I don't understand what both Ferrari drivers are seeing in Ferrari that they're like, oh, we'll just sign more longer contracts. I guess it's the payday, but still, I mean, like, come on, man. As at least in Hamilton, I get the whole idea of a payday, but Leclerc, come on, man. Jesus Christ, I'm a big fan, but damn, fuck me, man. Fuck me, like, Jesus, crazy stuff. But Behrman, I do think, has a great opportunity to show himself at, obviously, his home Grand Prix. Do I think that'll happen? Unfortunately, no, because like I said, with the car, it's just unlikely, to be honest. But I think he's just got to perform, right? Even with all the Ferrari news of Hamilton staying and everything, he's only 21, right? He's still young. He's still got a couple of years where he can grow, get some better experience of fighting with other teams and stuff like that, sort of like a Russell in a way. And then maybe when he's 23, 24 and 2029, potentially 2030, he can get the seat and just absolutely cook for Ferrari. Hopefully, fingers crossed, at least. Fingers crossed. So that's Haas for you guys. Let's move on to Williams. I don't know what to say about Williams anymore, to be quite honest, because it's a difficult one with Williams, right? Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz. Sainz had a bad race last week because of the retirement, but generally otherwise a good level of pace shown, right? Had a very good start, got up to 13th. I think, generally speaking, Williams are struggling. You look at their performance last week at Austria, what I thought would have been actually a generally good track for them was not so great. They were actually the worst out of the lot, only ahead of Cadillac and Aston. So it's not looking amazing for them, generally speaking. And I feel like Sainz and Albon are just nowhere, frankly speaking. More so Albon than Sainz. At least Sainz comes up with some decentish performances here and there, and he's still trying at times. I feel like with Albon, it's just been rough, honestly. I think it's just been a rough set of races for him, and it's been a rough season, actually, more so than anything else. And that's a problem, that's a problem going into what is I think a very interesting year for Williams, going into the rest of the year, working on upgrades. They're going to have to prepare for 2027. What I am curious on is, depending on how they end, I do wonder if one of these two drivers potentially might leave. We're going to have to wait and see. Again, I'm curious to see what upgrades they're going to be getting tomorrow. That'll be very fascinating, to say the least. I would love it if they did the upgrades announcements today so that I could do the race preview on the day before the race weekend starting. Because doing the race preview tomorrow doesn't help, because by the time I get around to it, it'll probably be practice and qualifying already, which is useless. Sprint qualifying, of course, this weekend, right? So Yeah, but I would love to know if Williams are bringing something, because they do need to bring something. They need to give more confidence to the drivers, because I think that's the thing that's lacking in both drivers right now, especially in the race. In qualifying, at least, they're trying. Obviously, it's not usually getting anywhere, but in the race, at least, if you give some confidence to the drivers, be it via strategy, be it via energy deployment, be it via something, you give confidence to the drivers, they'll at least have more faith on in you. But right now, I think it's very difficult for either driver to have faith in what's happening at the team. So I'm curious to see how the home race goes for Williams. It's going to be a very interesting one. Audi, my plucky Audi. Very close to points again in Austria, 11th and 12th. Generally speaking, I think they're doing pretty good, honestly. Yes, they've not been able to show it in the standings. Honestly, I think that's just unfortunate for them more than anything else. It's just unluckiness. It's just a case of bad luck more so than anything else. But I do think that both Gabriel Bortoleto, well, first and foremost, I should start with Gabriel. Good recovery to be able to show a good level of performance in Austria. I think he was just better than Hulkenberg throughout the entire weekend, and I hope he continues that going into Silverstone, because over the last few weeks before that, I think he was struggling a little bit. Hulkenberg had the measure of him. Unfortunately for Hulkenberg, that didn't really lead to points, unfortunately, and obviously he had that weird incident in Spain, of course, right? But I think both of them finishing 11th and 12th, showing some good performance in Austria, where generally speaking, yes, they would have had a little bit of an advantage thanks to the bigger turbo and everything. And obviously they had brought the ADU updates as well. I think they just need to push forward, get some nice, decent upgrades in, some circuit specification upgrades in if possible, and I think they'll do well this weekend. I think they'll do well. I'm curious to see how their battery fares more than anything else. I think for me, it's Red Bull and Audi that are a bit of an outlier in terms of their powertrains, because we don't really know how well they deploy necessarily, post updates and everything, and especially at a heavy battery management track like Silverstone. I think this week is going to show who's got the best battery and the weakest battery, really, to be honest. We've been discussing up until now ICE, ADUO, ICE, Red Bull's got the best, Mercedes second, Audi, Ferrari third and fourth, and so on and so forth. I think this weekend will be the test of batteries. We'll see who really has the better batteries, in my personal opinion. This is going to be the biggest test, I think, this weekend. I think going into this weekend, though, for the drivers, I think it's a case of just try and, keep those close points finishes up, if not get into the points, and just maintain that position if possible. That's going to be the continuation for these drivers. And in the case of, who's going to perform better than the other, I think Bortoleto is going to take over Hulkenberg, I think, this weekend. I think Bortoleto is going to finish ahead of Hulkenberg this weekend. Speaking of which, it is 1 year now since Hulkenberg got his first ever podium, of course, right? So that is also something to keep in mind. Do I think he's gonna continue that success? No, I don't think that's gonna happen this weekend. Last year he had the rain on his side. No, not this year. No. He doesn't have any rain this year. Unfortunately not. But you never know. British weather, anything can happen. Anything can happen. And speaking of anything can happen, well, nothing can happen with Aston Martin. They've confirmed to have not brought any updates this weekend, with updates only coming in Hungary. So Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll have at least one more week of torture, basically, to sustain with this AMR. The less said about this team, the better. I mean, if they can stay within 2 seconds of the fastest cars, it'll be a miracle. I think it's going to be a miracle. If they can finish the race with the battery being used that much, that'll also be a miracle, obviously, as well. But let's wait and see, of course, how next time round goes. I think in this case, I don't want to really talk about Aston Martin, because frankly speaking, they're going to finish bottom, or if Cadillac haven't fixed their reliability, second from bottom. It's not going to be any different. Fernando is going to be ahead of Lance. There's no doubt about it. Cadillac. Now, this is my favorite underdog team. Last week out was a disaster. Last week out was just an unmitigated disaster for Cadillac. The less said about last week, the better. they need to just fix their reliability issues. Hopefully they've brought some stuff this weekend to obviously fix those reliability issues. Maybe they've had some time to digest and dissect everything that's happened in the last week. They would have had the entire race to obviously do a full debrief, of course, of checking what the issue was back at the factory and on circuit as well. So fingers crossed going into this weekend, they would have at least brought maybe an upgrade or two, not necessarily an upgrade, but more so a reliability component to help with reliability. So yeah, the biggest thing we need to wait and see is if they can actually finish a couple of laps in the race. If they do that, I generally think this Perez has been performing better than Bottas, to be honest. I think that's going to continue on, to be honest. I think Perez is going to still carry on his good form. Bottas, he just needs to just do well. I think, again, for me personally, I think for both drivers, get to the finish line. That's the most important thing. Because we've seen the upgrades do work, by the way. I have to say that. Qualifying was going well for them. They did well in practice as well. They look decent now. Maybe not obviously still on the level of like a Racing Bulls or an Audi or anything of that sort, but they were closer to Williams, and I think that's super important, especially with that Ferrari engine in the back. So we'll have to see how they fare this weekend. Of course, saying they have a Ferrari engine in the back, we'll have to see how much that is a hindrance to them more so than anything else. But overall, I think their main priority is finish laps in the race. Top priority, nothing else. Temperatures are lower, so hopefully that should help them quite a bit as well. Now, for my predictions time. Like I said, I didn't really do the sprint predictions because I forgot it was a sprint weekend. But I'm going to say sprint qualifying, Antonelli on pole. Podium for sprint race, I think it'll be Antonelli, Russell, Verstappen. I think that's going to be my sprint podium. But for my race predictions, I think it's going to be this. I think Antonelli is going to finish first. I think Russell will actually get pole position, but I do think Antonelli is going to get him over the course of the race. More importantly, I think in third, it's going to be Lando Norris. I think over the course of the race, McLaren, I think, will do a better job with the Mercedes engine strategy and everything. I think they might take over Verstappen compared to the sprint race. But we're going to have to wait and see. Will I be right? Hopefully this time I will be right, because last week was an unmitigated disaster for yours truly when it came to the predictions. So fingers crossed I get these right at least, or at least get close to getting these right, because like I said, last week was just, it was just nowhere near. I was too far off. So yeah, but let me know in the comments, what do you guys think, how this weekend's going to pan out in terms of the battery management, predictions, first, second, third, who do you guys think will reign supreme come Sunday? I will see you guys, obviously if you're into Formula One only, I'll probably be doing a race review come Sunday, or maybe on Monday more so, doing an entire weekend review more so. It's a weekend review, not necessarily just a race review. It's an entire weekend review. There will be probably some shorts, obviously, post each session, going over, what happened in the sessions. And there will be a couple of other videos. I'm going to actually be doing an IndyCar video tomorrow going over the silly season that's happening there. Same with MotoGP as well. Maybe I'll do a video on MotoGP because Joan Mir going to potentially a Ducati factory bike. It's crazy. It's crazy over there, man. It's insane. Dixon going to McLaren and IndyCar. I don't know what's going on in this world anymore. But I'll catch you guys in the next one. Hopefully you guys have a lovely rest of your evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you may be. Catch you guys in the next one. Take it easy, everybody. Bye-bye.